Hi there everyone, my name is Sam Rose and I'm a published writer, a literary magazine editor and a 3-times cancer survivor. I had bowel cancer in 2010 at the age of 22 and duodenal cancer and uterine cancer in 2018 at the age of 30, all caused by Lynch syndrome, which is a genetic condition that makes people more likely to get different types of cancer. Earlier this year, I published my memoir, and I'm also a PhD student researching the connection between creative writing and cancer survivorship. I'm launching a new series of webinars called Cancer Scribblers, and these webinars are designed to help people living with and after cancer and their caregivers to get into writing, to hone your craft and share your story in your own way. The webinars will be live and they will be recorded so that you can watch them afterwards if you miss them, except for this first one, which is pre-recorded and completely free to give you a flavour of what these webinars are going to be like and to introduce you to the world of writing about cancer. As well as explaining what to expect from future webinars in this video, I will also be explaining how we can practice self-care when writing about cancer, which is so important. And I'll be introducing some of the writing forms and routes to publication. So I'm hoping that you'll find this introductory video really informative. Let's get started. So just to cover then what we're going to be looking at in this video, I'm going to take you through some session outcomes, which we will do at the beginning of every webinar. I'll tell you a little bit about this webinar series. We're going to talk about who can write, why we should even write about cancer to begin with, why we can share our stories. We're going to talk about self-care for writing about cancer, or for that matter, any trauma really. And we're also going to talk about some of the barriers to writing, what stops us and how can we overcome those barriers. And we're going to look at writing forms and what to write and how to write it and all of the different ways that we can express ourselves through this fantastic form. And I hope to introduce you all to the joys of writing if you're not already totally convinced. So today, our session outcomes, we're going to learn what to expect from the Cancer Scribblers webinars. We'll discover the mental health benefits of writing your cancer stories and sharing them with others. And we'll learn how to apply self-care practices to safeguard your mental health while writing. We'll also understand potential barriers to writing and how to overcome them. You'll be able to identify opportunities for sharing and publishing your writing online and in print. And I hope by the end you'll feel inspired to tell your story in formats that you may not have previously considered. You'll also notice that these videos are just very rough. I just like to keep it natural. Let's just leave in all of the places where I stumble over my words, because that's what I'm going to be like when I'm live. So let's just get that out of the way and say I am going to be a bit unpolished, and I think that that's all right. So about this webinar series then, I have 10 currently in mind, and they're all going to be live webinars at a certain time, but they will be recorded. They will be mostly a presentation like this, so they will be about 45 minutes or so of a presentation, and then there'll be a Q&A at the end where you can ask any questions and we can discuss things in more detail. It is going to be a pay what you like model, or pay what you can, and I'll know more about that once I've got everything set up in Eventbrite to get everything sorted out in terms of the live sessions. And then the topics then that I'm planning on including at the moment, we're going to look at blogging about cancer, writing poetry and cancer, writing your memoir, nice big project there, essay writing, which is not the kind of essays that you do in school. which probably fills some people with dread, I'm sure. It's much more like a snippet or a condensed version of a memoir. So it's personal non-fiction writing. I'd also like to do a session on getting published, so some really practical tips for sharing your work and what is that route to publication, how are you going to get your story out there if that's something that you're interested in achieving. We'll also do a session on polishing your writing, so spelling and grammar and proofreading and really just finessing your work. We'll also have a look at defeating writer's block, which I know is an issue for so many people, me included. I'd like to do a session on writing to explore identity beyond cancer, because we are all so much more than our diagnosis, and sometimes it can be difficult to connect with that. So I'd like to look at how writing can help us to get back to ourselves. We'll also explore body image through writing. So what issues has cancer thrown up about how we feel about our bodies, and not just about how they look, but our relationships with them, and how our feelings have changed in terms of trusting our bodies and things like that, and how can we explore that through writing. And then finally, taking back control through writing, because cancer does rob us of so much control over our lives. What control can we get back just through putting pen to paper? We'll have a look at that too. So I hope that there's a few things there that are of interest to people. So getting to the crux of this session then, and the kinds of things that I want to start off by talking about. Firstly, who can write and who should write? Because sometimes I feel like people think, oh, I shouldn't write about myself, or I'm not interesting enough to write about, my story isn't unique. I haven't lived enough experiences in order to have anything interesting to talk about, and none of that is true. I think that everybody has a story and a unique cancer experience that is worth exploring and sharing. All of us do. And yeah, it's just really important to feel that confidence when we're writing, and also when we're thinking about writing non-fiction, when we're writing about ourselves. If you think back to something that's happened to you, if you write about that thing on the day that it happens, you will write it in a certain way. If you think about the event weeks, months, years later, and you write about it each time, every time you look back at it, your memories will be slightly different. You'll write about it differently somehow. You'll have a different take on it, even if it's small. There'll be another angle to it. All of our experiences are so nuanced. There's never just one way to look at something. And it's the same when more than one person writes about one event. Even if they're writing about the same thing, we're going to write about very different things. We're going to have a different perspective on those events. And then when you're dealing with something like cancer, all of our experiences and illnesses are unique. So yeah, everybody does have a unique and interesting story. You have something that's worth saying, and if you want to write about it, you absolutely should write about it. I'd also like to add that we all deserve to be able to tell our cancer stories in our own language. Thinking about some of the phrases that are used in the media, in society, even among our friends and family, sometimes people explain things in ways that we just don't agree with. People might be talking about things that we've experienced, but the ways in which they talk about them don't necessarily always resonate with us. just to take an example, you have the war language, the battle language that surrounds cancer so often. He lost the battle, she's fighting. And a lot of people don't like this language because they feel it puts the onus on the person to fight, to try harder, implying that if they lose the battle, then there's something more that they could have done. And a lot of people don't like that language for that reason, but it is absolutely everywhere in the media. But then also, some people do like that language. Cancer survivors themselves, some of us find it empowering. You know, some of us do feel like fighters, that we do feel like that resonates with us. So truly, everybody is different. And the way that we tell our stories, we deserve to be able to tell those stories in our own language that feels right for us, whether it is battle language or it's something completely different, whether we want to use different metaphors, whether we just want to tell it like it is. We want to share all of the gory details about everything. I really advocate for us to be able to do that, and to tell our experiences as we've experienced them, and not just as we are portrayed in the media or in society. And that's why I think that writing our stories is really important. So why write about cancer specifically? So I've given this presentation a couple of times in more academic settings, and I've felt like I've had to first explain that cancer is a traumatic experience, because believe it or not, I have read journal articles and papers where people don't necessarily think that cancer is a traumatic experience. And if you've had cancer, or if you're close to somebody who's had cancer, I don't need to tell you that it is traumatic in so many different ways. And one of the reasons why it can be so helpful to write about cancer is to deal with that trauma and to process it. And there's been a lot of studies around how writing can help us to deal with traumatic experiences, and how writing can be really beneficial for our mental health. So I'll just quickly take you through some of these studies, because they span a range of different ways that we can write, and they show that writing in different forms can benefit us in different ways. So you might have heard of something called expressive writing, which is where you sit down and just get it all out on the page. You don't worry about your spelling or grammar. You don't really think in advance too much what you're going to write about or how you're going to approach it. It really is a very cathartic way of writing. It can also be called free writing. And there's been lots of studies on this, and how expressive writing can help people. So I've just taken one example here from Glass et al. In 2019, who found that expressive writing can help people to process trauma and to improve their psychological status. And then a huge name in the field of expressive writing is James Penbaker. And in 2014, he explained how short-term sadness can be followed by long-term benefits when we're writing, and we're doing these expressive writing exercises. So naturally, when you're dealing with a traumatic experience, if you're writing about it, it's going to bring up memories and negative feelings of sadness or fear or perhaps anger. And it's only natural that this is going to come up because we're unearthing these things. So there will be a short-term sadness, but Penbaker said that this can be followed by long-term benefits. So in his study, his participants reported feeling happier and feeling less negativity, less depressive symptoms, less rumination and anxiety in the time after, so months or weeks after taking part in the writing exercise. So yes, while there could be negative emotions coming up in the short term, there could be long-term benefits too. And then thinking about poetry, so Taylor et al. In 2009 did a poetry therapy study with some cancer patients. So looking at cancer specifically now, and it was a group writing session. And Taylor et al. Found that this poetry therapy session could improve emotional resilience and anxiety levels for cancer patients. So that's a really interesting and fantastic finding to advocate for writing poetry. And then finally, Danoff-Berg et al. Had a look at a different type of writing again, and this is a narrative structure. So this is really writing a story from beginning to end chronologically. You know, this happened, and then this, and then this, and then this. You know, I was diagnosed, and then this happened, and then there was a scan, and then this happened, and through to the end. And they looked at this type of writing and found that it could reduce intrusive thoughts and provide people with more control, because you're facing the events that happened head on and really organizing them and processing them. The process of doing this can help to reduce intrusive thoughts because you're consciously addressing all of these things. And to speak to that, I have also found that it can help me to just organize everything that has happened, because sometimes when you're in treatment or you're first diagnosed, it can all feel like a little bit of a blur, and things just run into one, and I can't remember, did I have this scan first, or when did this meeting happen, when did I get told this, and that kind of thing. So just having a personal record of what went on can just be really helpful to me, even just from a medical admin point of view, because of course there's so much medical admin that we have to deal with in the cancer world as well. So there's a few examples of ways that different types of writing can be beneficial for us. So we looked at why we should write. Why should we share our writing? So sharing our cancer stories can benefit ourselves because of all of the things that we've just talked about. It can also be a very cathartic process, and it has the ability to ultimately make us feel better. It can also benefit other people, because if they're reading our stories, then they can find out things about maybe things that they're also experiencing or about to experience. So yeah, so I spoke about why writing our stories can benefit us, sharing our stories can benefit us too, because we're giving to other people, and that can feel really good. And it can also help us to feel heard and understood as well. And sometimes that's what you really want. Sometimes it's enough just to write something just for ourselves and just get it down, and that's very cathartic. It makes us feel good. But then sometimes you do want to take it to the next level and share it with somebody, to be able to get them to understand what we've been through. And I would also say that writing, depending on who you want to see it, what outlet you're using to share it, you can also tell a lot of people things all at once, which can also be really useful when you're still in the middle of cancer treatment and you're just trying to update people without it being too much emotional labour for you. And then writing can also give us a sense of achievement, and publishing our writing or sharing it with somebody and getting good feedback from them, it can give us a real sense of achievement because we've created something really positive, hopefully something that we're proud of, out of this negative event. And then writing can also help us to advocate for ourselves and for others by sharing our stories, by explaining what this life is like to be a cancer survivor. And you can reach a lot of different audiences as well. You know, maybe you want to reach other cancer survivors, or you want to bring something to the attention of medical professionals perhaps, or just society as a whole to explain, you know, what this experience is like that people might not know about. It can also help us to raise awareness of overlooked issues, so cancer diagnoses that are rarer or that are quite common, like Lynch syndrome, for example, that is actually not that rare, but people don't know very much about it. So a lot of people do have it and they don't realise. So writing can help us to raise awareness of these kinds of issues, as well as other issues that people might not think about when they're thinking about cancer survivors, like the emotional aspects, because I didn't really have a clue before my diagnosis what the emotional fallout was going to be, and for a lot of people that turns out to be huge and very unexpected. So writing about our stories and sharing them is a way to help raise awareness of these kinds of things. So really important then is our self-care for writing about cancer. So I've talked about the benefits of writing about cancer and trauma, but it is important to bear in mind that there are also risks. So I do have to say that not everybody will benefit from writing, and some people will benefit more than others, and it really depends on things like if you write all the time anyway, or if you've never written before, if writing makes you feel anxious or worried about your abilities perhaps, and also sharing comes with those risks as well. So it's really important to just be mindful about how writing makes you feel. I can't speak to people individually and say, yes, writing will benefit you, or no, it won't benefit you. So it's just really important for you to think about how it's affecting you while you're doing it. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then some ways of writing can be more beneficial as well. So going back to our friend Penbaker, talked about how when you openly acknowledge your emotions, then you could feel more benefit from your writing. So when you're just really honest with yourself about everything, then you'll feel more benefit than if you're holding back. If you construct a coherent story, going back to Danoff Berg talking about writing narratively from beginning to end, that can also be beneficial. Switching perspectives is another way of doing it where you may find some benefit. For example, you could write in third person or second person instead of writing from first person, or you could write from the point of view of a caregiver or somebody else close to you, or maybe a medical professional, and that can be beneficial as well. And then also when you express yourself honestly by finding your own voice rather than perhaps trying to imitate another writer that you admire, when you really find your own voice and your way of writing that feels authentic and genuine for you, then that can be more beneficial than not. And then the recency of trauma. So if a trauma occurred within the last few days, it might not be that beneficial to write about it just yet. So thinking weeks or months afterwards, it could be more beneficial to write about the thing than if it's literally just happened. There's also a risk of analysing or ruminating too much and, you know, telling the same stories over and over, really getting focused on one thing without having a resolution for it. So there is a risk of that. There's also a risk of somebody reading your private writings, I guess. If you are just writing for yourself, make sure that, you know, things are not just left lying around where somebody else might pick them up. And a risk of negative feedback if you share either on purpose or by accident. There's sometimes that risk of people being critical or not understanding. And then of course we have the risk of negative feelings as well, so that initial sadness that you might feel while you're unearthing these memories and thinking about things that you otherwise might have pushed down a little bit. So yeah, it is really just a case of balancing these risks with the benefits, because the benefits can be wonderful. I would just say make sure you're in the right frame of mind for writing about this difficult thing. For example, if you've got a scan coming up or something, maybe you feel like, oh, I can't bear to think about these things right now, I have enough going on, or I'm already worried. Then don't force yourself to write about something if you don't feel like it's going to benefit you. But if you feel like you're in a good place, then by all means, if you feel strong and ready to do it, then go for it. But then keep in mind how you feel about it all the time, and how is it affecting you. And then when you start to feel a bit drained, or like, oh, I've just started to have enough of this now, it's starting to bring me down a little bit, then recognize that it's perhaps time to stop and just have a break. So both writing and not writing about cancer can be a form of self-care. So we've already discussed how writing about cancer can help you to organise your thoughts. It can give you the benefit of creating something positive that you're proud of from an experience that may have been overall negative. And it can also sometimes provide a sense of closure for you, especially if you're publishing. Just to mention from my own personal experiences, when I wrote my memoir, I didn't particularly feel any closure. I've never really felt closure from writing something, because I know that I always have that fear of recurrence, you know, worried that, you know, something else is going to happen in the cancer journey or experience doesn't really end. But when I wrote my memoir and I had published that, it did feel like not closure, but I was encapsulating it in this thing where I could just pick it up and put it to the side and say, okay, that's done. I know that there's probably going to be more to my story, but for now, this chapter, this particular bit is done, and maybe I can move on a little bit from that. Maybe I can just hold it there, and it can just stay there for now. It's difficult to describe. But also, writing about other things completely unrelated to cancer can remind us of who else we are. So we can go into this more deeply in our session on writing to explore cancer and identity. But I don't know about other people, but sometimes I feel like, oh, I am just a cancer survivor or patient, and I feel like I've perhaps lost a bit of myself, and you know, things have changed so much, and I've lost a lot of control, and yeah, writing about other things that make up our identity can also be really helpful, or just writing about completely different things altogether, just to have a distraction from something that might be worrying us. So writing about other things can be really beneficial too. So it's important to practice self-care when we're writing about trauma, and again, that is kind of connected with writing about different things, and just varying it a bit and giving yourself a break. So that might be, you might have been writing about your cancer story for a little while, but you feel you need a break. That could be writing about something completely different, something that makes you really happy. Or it could be just taking a break from writing altogether and just going to do something else. But it is just being mindful of how writing is making you feel. And the same goes for reading as well, which is where I first sort of realised that how important it is to be mindful, because I would be on the internet, I'll be reading somebody's blog, and then, you know, they would have a different experience to me, and I might think, oh gosh, what if that happens, what happened to this person happens to me in the future, and get down this rabbit hole of worry. And then I would realize, oh, you know, I really need to stop reading the internet, because it's just it's not doing me any favors at all. Of course, having said that, the internet can be wonderful for connecting us all in the way that we are right now, and helping us to share information and be empathetic with each other and building community. But at the same time, it can also be it can also be a little bit negative if you do find yourself sort of reading and spiraling. So it is a similar thing to be mindful of when you're reading and when you're writing as well. So what are some barriers to writing then, and how can we overcome them? So thinking a little bit of writer's block, for one thing, just not knowing where to start. And this is something that free writing can really help with, just insisting on sitting yourself down and just picking up the pen and just writing whatever comes into your head. And it doesn't matter if, you know, it's not a masterpiece, if it's not, you know, your best writing, if it's not something that you want to publish, or if you just want to throw it away and never see it again, is absolutely fine. Just the process of starting something. And that kind of ties in as well with this barrier of striving for perfection, because sometimes we get so hung up on writing the perfect sentence and editing and re-editing and just trying to get something so perfect that we end up not really starting at all, or not really getting as far as we would like to. I'm definitely a believer in something being done is better than being perfect. I'm not a perfectionist by any means. So yeah, just stopping getting in our own way with perfectionism, and just letting things come. And I put down there fear of being judged, and I think that judging ourselves also is something that is a barrier, along with that striving for perfection. Is judging our own writing, and is this any good? It's fine, it doesn't need to be good straight away. You know, that's what editing is for. That's what going back and reading again at a later date is for. But then there is also this fear of being judged by other people when we're sharing our stories, the fear of our writing being judged as not being good enough, or fear of being really open about our experiences. And that is difficult to overcome, really. And that also can go alongside worrying about upsetting other people. When we're thinking about, well, where are we sharing our stories, and who is going to be reading them? And I don't worry at all about what strangers are going to think about me, because that really doesn't matter, because they don't know me. But if I know that somebody I know, somebody in my family or my friends have read something that I've written, then it's a case of kind of looking at it and being like, oh gosh, you know, I wonder what they thought about that. Should I have not said this? Especially when you're writing memoir, and there's so many people involved with the things that we're writing about, and also upsetting other people, not just necessarily, you know, it may be that something negative happened, maybe something negative happened to us and it was because of another person, and we don't want to make them feel bad or like feel like we're bad mouthing them, I guess, in our writing, but at the same time we want to be true to ourselves and our stories and explain what happened as it happened. But then there is that worry of upsetting people by saying anything negative or that might be construed as negative, and you might end up second guessing what people are going to think. But there's also this element of worrying about upsetting other people, because we're writing about experiences, some of them might be painful, and we don't want to write about things that cause other people pain when they read them. So, you know, if our families are reading about you know, things that have upset or hurt us, and you know, because they feel bad when we feel bad, and we don't want them to feel pain when reading our work, when we're sharing it. So these are all things that are important to consider, but in some cases it is really good to be able to overcome these, because maybe people aren't as bothered about what we think that they will be. You know, maybe talk about an event that happened, and maybe they do end up reading it, but actually they're absolutely fine with you saying what you said. So yeah, it is again just kind of try to just get everything out first and then worry later about what other people are going to think about it. So there's so many forms that our writing can take, and we're going to have a look at them in future sessions. So firstly, we have journaling, which is just writing for us, and that's where we can start experimenting and writing about these things that have happened to us and how we feel about them. Maybe we could also try some free writing or expressive writing there. And we have memoir and essays as well, so very much kind of prose forms. You have poetry, fiction, if you wanted to perhaps write about your experiences by through a character, so kind of a fictionalized autobiography, for example. And then you have hybrid work, because not everything has to neatly fit into one particular form. You know, you have all sorts of things like prose poetry, lyric essays, all of these things that kind of sit in between poetry and prose. So are they long lines? Are they paragraphs? Are they sort of line breaks in a very much a traditional poetry format? Is it some kind of weird mix of both? And it can be really exciting as a writer to be able to experiment with that, because you don't just have to fit into one particular form, and you can just write what feels natural for you, and again worry about classifying it as one particular form later. Guest blog posts are a brilliant thing to get into that I'll talk about more in a future session. I've really enjoyed and really appreciated being given a platform on other people's blogs where I can just write one article about one very particular aspect of survivorship. Starting your own blog as well, again, really useful if you're currently still in treatment, or if you're wanting to update people, and you could write a blog and just update it regularly, share that on Facebook, and you know, people can just read it and then just know what's going on with you without you having to have these laborious conversations with everybody who needs to know. It's like, just, oh hi, how are you doing? Oh yeah, just read my blog and then you'll know everything. And then writing a book as well, so writing a memoir or a novel perhaps, or a collection of essays or a collection of poetry or short stories or dreams or hybrid pieces. There's just absolutely so much that you could potentially do. So I'm going to have a look at these forms in more detail in future sessions. And again, in future sessions, we'll have a look at what to write and how to write it. So just some things to think about initially are, how long do you want this piece to be, you know, and sort of tied in with that, how much time do you have and how much energy do you have available? You know, do you just want to get something small out? Maybe you just want to write a quick poem, or maybe you really are looking at something longer form like a memoir. And then what tone do you want to write it in? Is it going to be something comedic? You know, Cancer lends itself so well to black comedy. Or is it something very serious? Is it something for medical professionals perhaps? And then that goes into the audience as well. So all of these things tie together. So your audience is, if you're looking at publication, your audience is going to affect, well, what tone do you want to use to write this? And when I wrote my memoir, I sent off a copy to a couple of my consultants, and the consultant I've been with the longest, who is absolutely wonderful, he wrote back to me and said that he'd learned a lot from my memoir. And I was just so surprised. He said, you may be surprised to hear that I learned a lot from it. And I'm thinking, yes, I'm absolutely gobsmacked actually that I could teach you, you know, a medical professional who's been doing this for decades, you know, that I could teach you anything. So that really showed me that there was an audience out there for my writing that I perhaps hadn't thought about addressing before. So that opened new doors for me. That gave me some extra food for thought there. So who do you want your audience to be? Is it medical professionals? Is it somebody who's just starting treatment or just had a diagnosis and you want to reassure them, you want to empathize with them? You know, who is that for you? And how much of your experience are you willing to share? So if you're looking at writing a memoir, then you're probably looking at sharing quite a big chunk of your experience. But then if you're thinking, I'm not quite sure how much I'm willing to give away and be open about yet, then maybe you could be looking at poetry. Maybe you could be looking at guest blog posts about something very specific, and you could go into more detail about a very a more narrow scope of things that you've experienced. And then of course there is that desire to write about something else entirely, which, as we've talked about, can also help you to deal with cancer experiences. Sometimes I write in metaphors and I think that I'm just writing about one thing, and then I realise, oh, actually no, this is about my cancer experience. I'm just writing metaphorically, and sometimes I don't realise I'm doing that. You might find that sometimes you think you're writing about one thing and then you find you're actually writing about something else, or your writing tells you something that you didn't know. Yeah, sometimes you just don't know how you feel until you do start writing, and then your writing tells you, and that can be so therapeutic as well. So that's really all I have for you today. I hope that's really given you some food for thought for what you might want to write about in terms of your cancer experience, and how you might want to share your stories and what avenues you may want to go down for reaching out to people and sharing that story. And I hope that some of the things that I've talked about today are things that are interesting enough for you to want to come to a full webinar about a particular topic. So there are those 10 topics that I mentioned earlier that I will be hosting webinars on. in the near future. So if you want to get in touch with me at all about anything, you can email me, sam@peakingcatliterary.co.uk. Peking Cat Literary is my literary journal and podcast and now webinar sort of platform. So you can find me personally on Twitter and Facebook at writer Sam R, and you can find Peking Cat Literary on Facebook and Twitter as well, or visit the website peakingcatliterary.co.uk. I'll be putting all sorts of information on there in the future about these webinars, and yeah, lots of updates about what's to come. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you found it useful. Please let me know if you did. Please reach out and just say hi. Tell me which webinars you're thinking about coming in on. What are you interested in? Is there something that you'd really like to know about that I just haven't covered here? Maybe that could be a whole new session that I could plan for you. So yeah, thank you so much, and I hope to see you Cancer Scribblers really soon. Bye for now.